The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the host's past, present, or future employers. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the BreakSec broadcast, if you will. I'm Brian Brake, Mr. Betcher, of course. Thank you, Mr. Betcher, for joining me.
Pleasure.
Yeah, Ms. Berlin is. Let me read exactly what she said here because I want to not take it out of context. What did she say? She said, I said, "Are you going to be able to join us tonight?" She's like, "I just finished Mother's Day at my house." Oh, well, hello to all mothers. Thank you for Happy Mother's Day to everybody. Have my RSA presentation due tomorrow to work on. So if I can finish that in the next 3 hours, I'll join. So I told her to work on her RSA talk because we want to make sure that she's got some legit stuff going on. Yeah, Super Lolly. I've still got to fix that stuff. It's it's not. We're not going to be talking with Apiary. That was an excellent discussion on setting up OWASP Zap automation. There, I will fix that at some point in the future. I have to work on my workflow for that. So thank you, Super Lolly. I'd like to welcome our guest for this week. It is Mieng. Hello, Mieng. Mieng is the VP of Product for Digital Defense by HelpSystems. So welcome. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you got into product VP of product, and what does it take to get to that point in a career? Because I'm very interested, having moved to product security myself, how that works for folks.
I think that what I'm finding out is so many product managers these days are coming into the product management, product strategy function from just everywhere, really. Whether your background was in sales, in marketing, in development, in sales engineering, any one of those roles, customer support even, can find themselves in a product management, product strategy kind of role. My story is, as a good Asian kid, I was supposed to be a doctor, and I didn't get along real well with organic chemistry. So I decided to go computer science, graduated with a computer science degree from Trinity University, go Tigers, and decided that I just do not like to code. So that kind of took me very circuitously through roles in sales engineering, support, into product marketing, and then into product management. So it's been an exciting journey because really you get involved in every aspect of the product, from inception all the way through delivery, and continuing on through that, interfacing with customers, interfacing with the development team, trying to make that product better for your users. So, if you're one of those folks that likes to fix things, product strategy, product management, I think is a great role.
Very cool.
In a way, we're all kind of doctors of, when our computers are sick, we have to diagnose and fix these problems. And that's probably why they call them viruses. Right?
Absolutely.
It's interesting how InfoSec and security kind of base a lot of their terminology off of different industries. Medicine, war, defense, combat type stuff. It's interesting how we borrow our jargon from a lot of different places. So, okay. Well, so a little background. I didn't know Mieng until I got an email from a PR company. And as I've mentioned on a couple of streams, I don't normally even read those things, but I looked at Angela's, who is the PR person, and I read through these, and blockchain, and then it was like Mieng talking about ransomware phases before, during, and after. And I was like, huh, that's different. Okay, let's do that one. And I actually reached out and I told Angela, I was like, I don't answer these things. I don't even reply to these things. They mostly get stuck in the round file folder and never looked at. So I'm very happy that we could get Ming on to talk about ransomware and how everything works before, during, and after that. Uh, so the topic is outsmarting ransomware as a service. So when you're talking ransomware as a service, this is not something people can buy. Obviously, this is I'm assuming the stuff you get online, like a kit or something like that, where people can
Sort
use,
of,
and
yeah. So we have
but
these ransomware groups basically that, internationally, who are their initial access brokers, effectively. They've somehow gained initial access, and they're hanging out in a network, and they are basically selling access. And the crazy part of this is that there's an entire business around this. There are some of these ransomware groups who there, you can believe it, there are customer service representatives for these ransomware groups selling the ransomware access so that you can run your own piece of malware, ransomware, etc. Where if you have trouble, utilizing their tool set that they've sold to you, they will help you make sure that the ransomware is working properly. And as the victim, you can call a number to say, hey, help me pay you to get access back. There are customer service representatives. So it truly is a business. And so, we have, I think, Mr. Betcher here and I are talking earlier about, a lot of organizations have the tools in place to identify that initial access early on. And so you can prevent these ransomware groups, these malicious actors, from using your network in this manner. However, too many organizations still don't have what we consider the foundational security elements in place to protect them from a bad actor gaining that initial access, initial hold, and then utilizing, sitting, navigating through their network, doing all the things that they normally do, and setting up their business, setting up shop inside your network. So there are strategies that organizations need to take to make sure that they are protected against that initial access, for one, can detect that access. Two, in the event that others start utilizing or leveraging that network for malicious purposes. And then three, to ensure that in the event of an incident like this, they have plans in place and procedures in place for mitigation and remediation. Because, ultimately, I think the mentality has been that, you've already been breached, right? Every single network, every single CISO, CIO, CISO, network administrator, IT administrator, whatever title you hold in IS, IT, and cybersecurity, that the network has already been breached. That assumed breach mentality, and start from there and say, all right, what do I need to do now in response to this and to mitigate it spreading further throughout the network? So we did a webinar around outsmarting this ransomware, just providing some tips and some additional kind of insight into activities that organizations should be taking pre-event, during the event, and then post-event, should an incident like this happen, to try to help prevent the proliferation of the ransomware as a service, and hopefully ransomware in general as well.
Okay. So let's take it in phases. Let's start out with the before part, the initial access brokers. And I've heard this on other podcasts too, like Risky Business, and those is, it's like that's a huge business, and then that is where the real ransomware folks kind of outsource to. They specialize in everything, so the ransomware folks aren't doing the initial access. What are some of the methods that they use to do access, to gain initial access? Is it just phishing? Is it a combination of a bunch of stuff that we've seen and heard? Is there anything new
It
that
absolutely is. It's all those things that you expect, that you should be preventing or have mechanisms in place to help prevent. It's phishing, it's social engineering, it's malware in some cases. It's all of these things. And what we find is that a statistic my marketing team pulled for me is that in total, if you look at all of the ransomware, 2 out of 3 ransomware attacks are facilitated by this ransomware as a service setup. So that means that these initial access brokers selling their access to other parties to initiate their ransomware. 2/3 of attacks are kind of from that style of setup. So that means that we see organizations that have bad actors sitting in on their network for amounts of time, right? And we've seen the dwell times on some of this malware in networks from, gosh, I think the last numbers were still in the 100 some odd days. So it could be months that these bad actors are sitting on your network, setting up their business, it's a very professional kind of situation these days. But as far as the traditional cyber hygiene type of things that they're attacking, they're using malware, they're using social engineering, which is it's social media in general. I think a lot of people are still don't understand the tie-in of their personal life to their corporate life and the networks and how much information you share. There's still so much information that can be harvested from social networks that can be used against you, and they are actively being used against you. So credential stuffing, all of those things that make it easy for a bad actor to access your account makes it easy for a bad actor to access your corporate network as well. So we're still seeing those same tools being used. So when we're talking about things that an organization should be doing pre-event, in preparation or before an attack happens, right? Are all of those kind of defense in depth cyber hygiene things, reducing your attack surface in general. What does that mean? That means you need a very resilient network that is patched, that has limited access. I know one of the big buzzwords these days is zero trust. Everybody should be zero trust, and that's great, but zero trust is hard. Zero trust is not easy to implement. Not everyone has the resources or the funding to be able to implement a zero trust environment. So what else can an organization do? Make sure that you're scanning your network on a regular basis, both for vulnerabilities, for malware. And the big takeaway from the scanning is making sure that you're fixing actually things, because what good is scanning and knowing where weaknesses lie if you're not doing something to either fix it or mitigate it, right? Monitor for those initial access brokers. Utilize, there's lots of services out there that will help you with monitoring your domain to make sure you don't have any squatters or folks that are redirecting, creating fake domains affiliated with your brand or what have you. Make sure you have tools in place for employees to report phishing efficiently or anything like that. And make sure you're monitoring those emails that are coming in that are being reported by your employees, because they're your first line of defense, right? Make sure you're training your employees. Make sure you have incident response plans in place, that you have the backups that are prepared for an incident like this. You're trying to eliminate the weaknesses, eliminate potential access points, minimize your target, your organization as a target by reducing that attack surface for potential phishing or malware or anything like that, being able to limit that access, detecting any domains that may look alike or may pose a challenge for your employees to detect, where malware and phishing emails can be sourced from. And then making sure that you've got the ability to recover quickly. So these are all things that can be done ahead of time. Some of these items, are, like I mentioned earlier, kind of foundational cyber hygiene, building blocks of a good cybersecurity program. You should be doing it already. And if you're not, you are way behind and need to get started. And then other things, we often hear from customers and folks who don't have a lot of funds, right? And that's totally understandable. They don't have allocated funds for cybersecurity specifically. But there are so many things that you can do that don't cost that much. Number one, training of your employees to be very vigilant with their cyber hygiene as they're interacting online and communicating electronically. So that's kind of number one. If you can minimize that piece of the attack surface, you're doing that much better already.
Okay, those are all great points. You mentioned just open. It sounds like a lot of it is a lot of open communication. It's going to be being able to allow people to tell your company that there's something wrong, and actually to dovetail on that, I saw that the security.txt has now been ratified by people. So now a lot of websites will now have the wherewithal to add a security.txt to their websites for if there's, for vulnerability disclosure. If you have a bug bounty program, you can put that information in there. Legitimate emails. I don't know how many times I've tried to, been on an engagement and said, hey, where's the notice for your bug bounty program or whatever? And they're like, well, it's buried in our T's and C's in our privacy page. And it's like, okay, nobody's going to read your T's and C's. So I don't know why you stuck it in there. Well, they're checking a box, right? So now there's a super easy way of doing it. You just, go to, google.com/security.txt or I don't know if that exists, but, being able to communicate that out easily. So you also mentioned email addresses, which, that kind of goes in hand with the security stuff. Do you suggest, because part of the communication, depending on your company, you may get tens of thousands of emails to abuse at or security at. Do you suggest for better communication in your company to have a specifically formatted requirement, like a subject line or something like that? What does it look like? When you get tens of thousands of emails a day, being able to parse out the legitimate stuff versus the non-legitimate stuff.
Absolutely. For our kind of blue shirts, if you will, defending that network, right? Your network administrators, your domain administrators that are managing those support tickets coming in, right? If you don't have a ticketing platform or something along those lines where a phishing email can be identified, make sure that you have a very specific policy set up and your employees are familiar with it. You want to make it easy. If you have a tool to help monitor or filter out phishing, many of these tools offer an Outlook plugin that will give you a button so that you can just literally hit the button and it will take care of sending the email, forwarding it to the appropriate mailbox, etc. In the absence of one of those tools or that plugin, make sure that you have a mailbox specific for phishing and not just abuse or other types of abuse, so that you can target these much more quickly. They can be filtered to the top of the box, the top of the to-do list for the IT staff. But absolutely having some type of formal workflow, which includes that mailbox and then the actions on the IT side to validate the submissions is essential.
Very cool. All right. So you have in our notes here, which we'll be adding to the list. You said there's a belief So I don't know who might believe this. I'm assuming it's more senior leadership in companies that you might work with. The belief that malicious actors today are using cutting edge techniques for a majority of the attacks. We've been a huge proponent of, they're not going to burn O'Day on you, that whatever, no matter it, it it can be stupid, but if it works, then it's good, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
who believes this in an organization? I mean, the security people are probably a bit more savvy. So is it that our security people need to do a better job of communicating that, or is
I
it,
think I
go
think
ahead.
when you look at some of the organizations, I very much agree. The security savvy individuals, those folks that are kind of tied into organizations and podcasts like this one, are familiar with the fact that it's not the 0 days that are going to get you. It's the vulnerabilities that have been around for 2, 5, 10 years. We're still seeing instances of 08067. We're still seeing instances of 1710, where organizations just have not patched. And um, you can see, and I think industry analysts agree here too. And I think that in general, we have this problem with patching systems. Why the question remains, why are organizations leaving vulnerabilities unpatched on their networks, in some cases for years? If there's not a mitigation to be taken, then something else has to happen.
Right.
That vulnerability cannot continue to exist on your network, especially when we're still seeing malicious actors utilize and leverage those vulnerabilities with exploit kits that have been around for years and ages. So I think that's really the biggest question that remains unanswered by the security industry in general. But as far as just like you mentioned, it's not the 0 day that's going to burn you. It's going to be these vulnerabilities that are several years old. And the challenge has been that executive staff, board of directors, supervisory committees that often control the budget don't understand that. They see the 0 day and they panic because the 0 day makes the news. But some of these vulnerabilities that are actually being exploited aren't making the news because they're old news. And so, the cutting edge techniques, well, yes and no. All of it, honestly, when you look at some of the ransomware being executed these days, these attacks are a little more targeted, right? I talked a little bit earlier about social media. They're utilizing that type of information about your organization to customize their toolkits for and against you and your network. And so it's not cutting edge, it's just customizing existing attacks, existing toolkits for your particular scenario. And it's not a 0 day. It really isn't to get that initial access. So I think that the reason I make that statement or that belief is that often IT isn't heard, security isn't heard by executive staff. And so we need to make sure that this is communicated, that it's not, I don't need to buy, this shiny new thing to protect against the 0 day. I need more resources to help me fix the conditions that are already on the network, or I need the right tools to help me resolve these items to protect the organization against an attack.
Right. Mr. Betcher?
Yeah, I think a great way to defend your organization is just to choose any number of the EDR products out there, right? There are many of them, and I don't, condone or, I'm not going to advertise any one of them because I think they're all pretty good for what they do. And, if you're going to provide your employees with a laptop with an operating system on it, Typically it's Windows, like a workstation. That's going to cost you a lot of money. I don't know how much it costs an organization. Let's just say $500, right? You could tack on an additional $20 and you can have that thing protected by a very modern, world-class malware protecting software, right? And it's not going to catch everything there is, and you can, like you said, Ming, be targeted. And there are malware that are specifically designed to get through those particular EDR products, right? Specifically made for whatever one you choose. And if you're targeted by a great attacker, there's pretty much nothing you can do at that point, right? So, I mean, $20 per endpoint. I think it's worth the investment, right? And probably a lot of executives don't understand that. They look at the price tag and they're like, oh, it's $100,000. We can't afford that. But how much are your workstations overall costing? And what fraction of that cost is really good industry standard protection, right, for malware? That's one thing that you might have to consider, or at least have a conversation about, right? If you're in an organization that can't afford the fancy protections, right, of malware. So that's one thing I'd like to get out there. Like it's not like it's half the cost of your machine, to have this software on there.
Right.
Definitely agree with that. That ounce of protection, kind of a proverb there for that pound of cure. It's definitely relevant here, and what you've said is absolutely on point in terms of there are many different options in the market at many different price points. So it's going to be, you'll be able to find something that can help the organization. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we have a question from one of our watchers. Kuda Gitsune says, why don't they patch the system in time? And I replied back, I was like, you're assuming the companies have that. Yeah. In the last week, we've had a F5 big IP vulnerability, which I was going to talk about a little later. It's like a 9.8. And they found out that there's exploit code out for it in the wild. There was a UC libc vulnerability, which could affect a lot of IoT related systems or any embedded systems that you can do DNS poisoning on. There's a lot of vulnerabilities out there and they just keep coming. And as you invest in more technology, there's more things to patch, which makes your patching more complicated, which takes more time away from your IT department, from meetings and other things. That the old adage is your blue team is having to go to 8 hours worth of meetings every day, while the attackers got that 8 hours to do whatever it is they need to do. It's complicated landscape. I mean, every time you invest in a new technology, you have to add a couple of new keywords to your threat intelligence model or your Twitter feed to make sure that you're keeping track of the up-to-date vulnerabilities on those systems. And as I had mentioned in chat, I was like, the time and effort causes many orgs to have to triage what they can patch. And if your patching systems are patchy in this case and don't catch everything, you might miss a machine, or your WSUS system or whatever it is that you're using may not necessarily get everything, or patches may not be applied correctly. So there's a ton of things. Even if you are doing hygiene, you may not get 100% on that. All you need is one thing, right? To make that happen. So and that's a sad fact of life, but yeah, it is. So so Ming, I had another question. So we talked about phishing. We talked about things like, social engineering that the attackers are doing. Have you seen an uptick in the number of insider threat issues at all?
Yes and no. Yes, from the perspective of obviously these last 2 years for IT has been challenging. A lot of organizations were not set up for their employees to work remotely, introducing, a whole new avenue of attack for their organizations. They didn't have their VPN set up properly. They didn't have access controls, identity management, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been rough for a lot of IT folks these last 2 years. Having employees more remote introduced an increase in that insider threat, but unintentionally. I think it wasn't that there was intentionally an increase in insider threat so much as, mom's at home in a conference, walks away for 30 seconds, and the kid comes in and starts surfing on her mom's laptop while she's away, right? Or dad, steps away from his machine and doesn't lock it like he would normally have done while he was in the office, and leaves access open, and kid hops on and starts navigating to sites that wouldn't normally be done. And so insider threat from that perspective, I think the unintentional insider threat, we've definitely seen an increase of, with all of the global activities and the environment happening. More intriguing emails have been utilized for phishing. And so the likelihood is again higher. The click rate increases because we're decentralized. And so it's that unintentional insider threat that we've seen increase over the last couple of years. Outside of that, it's been, I think one of the things that employers really need to be aware of right now is, given the environment that we're in with a very competitive market for resources, maintaining and retaining your resources and keeping them happy is important, especially for those that have access. The likely or the possibility just increases right now because so many opportunities exist that for a change of career, a change of organization, what have you, really need to be on watch for individuals that might take malicious action, either purposely or not. But I think the conditions exist right now where the threat level is much higher from that particular avenue.
Right. And that's where we're in part 1 with Ming, talking about trends in ransomware and what you can do to protect yourselves. We talked a little bit about insider threat there at the end as well, so that was a nice little addition to the discussion. If you want to check out our 8 years of podcasts, you can go to our website, www.breakingsecurity.com. You can also follow and subscribe to the BreakSec broadcast at twitch.tv/BreakSec. You can follow Brian Betcher on Twitter at BetcherPwned. You can follow Ms. Berlin at InfoSyster, INFOSYSTIR. You can follow me on Twitter and Mastodon. You can look me up on Twitter at Brian Break, and also Brian Break on Mastodon.social. Thank you to our Patreon supporters and our server boosters on our Discord and our subscribers on Twitch. All of them contribute greatly to our continued success and just the time and effort it takes to put out a weekly broadcast, regular podcasts, and other content that we're working on. So thank you all so much for your help. We also thrive on advertisements. If you tell a friend, leave a 5-star review on a major podcast platform, podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Google Podcasts, that would be great. Please include your accolades or your positive comments. Those are ways that can also gain us more exposure and get more people to download and listen to our show. Also, just your recommendation to a friend or a coworker can also grant us new listeners as well. So that's always much obliged to you. So have a great week. Be kind to one another. Take care of yourselves because you're the only one you have. And we'll talk to you again soon.